and welcome to GameSack. We're taking another look at some games that were never released. They were going to be, but for whatever reason, they were canceled.
And by the end of this episode, you're going to be like, man, these should have been released. I want them sitting on my shelf so I can play them anytime I want.
And show them off to people who come over and look at the shelf.
Exactly right. But that's not going to happen. So
no, not at all. So let's just get into it. This is Jesse, the Body Ventura wrestling superstars on the Sega Genesis from Dreamworks. This one was originally announced in early 1991 at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. It also appeared at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show that same year. There was even a full-page ad on the back of one issue of the all-Sega magazine called Mega Play. Aside from that and a couple of screenshots, that's all we ever heard about the game until it was leaked a year ago. This prototype is nearly complete as far as I can tell, with only a few things that still need to be taken care of. More on that in a minute. The game itself is surprisingly not that bad. It's easy to get into and the buttons are all simple to figure out. You've got a roster of 24 different wrestlers to play as and against. The game was actually programmed by Human, makers of the Fire Pro Wrestling franchise, and that's likely why this game feels somewhat competent. The graphics, however, look a little sparse for a 16-bit game. And each and every ring that you fight in looks exactly the same, colors and everything. There's not a ton of animation, but I suppose it suffices for what it is. And believe it or not, the music is kind of good and fun to listen to. So what didn't they finish up? Well, the life meters never move no matter how much damage is done to either you or your opponent. Also, in the options screen where you assign your controls, it would be really nice to see what those buttons did instead of just switching the order of the letters around. Other than that, well, it feels mostly complete if a bit weak for the system. My guess is that Dreamworks couldn't afford to release the game, especially with a celebrity endorsement. I mean, they weren't exactly the most profitable third party in the Genesis lineup, but I've never been able to find any official reason. However, most assets from the game were recycled into Thunder Pro Wrestling Retsuden, which, of course, was only ever released in Japan.
Super Shadow of the Beast was planned to be released on the Super Nintendo. The pathetic non-super regular version was released for just about every other system and home computer out there. But something happened to this one during development and the game got cancelled. There's multiple rumors flying around as to why it got cancelled, but nobody knows the real reason. One rumor speculates that the game is too grim and the imagery is too scary. The game would have had to have been censored quite a bit to meet Nintendo's rigid standards. And those standards weren't met, so the game was cancelled. Another rumor is that Nintendo dropped the game because it just wasn't good enough to be released. Based on what we've played of this ROM, I'm gonna have to side with that because this really, well, it isn't good enough. Playing the game, I felt that it was way too difficult. And not in a way that makes you want to keep playing to get better, but more in the way that it's just cheap. Everything feels way more powerful than you. Your character's reach is shorter than a wet noodle and just about as strong. When traversing any level, you can count on getting hit from fireballs, traps, and water drops. What is it with Euro games and water drops being harmful? I could see if it were acid or some other chemical, but Jesus, just water. It won't take but a few moments before you're dead. Now, would all of these issues have been addressed and corrected for the final release? Who knows? Some parts of certain levels were changed a bit from other versions of the game. Unfortunately, none of the changes in any way make this game super. One of the strong points of this series is the music. The music on the CD games is beyond amazing and saw regular play in my car's CD player. But just listen for a second to the music in the Super Nintendo version here. Same composition, but oh my god is that bad. I absolutely love this soundtrack, but this was the first time that I've ever wanted it to be turned off. Not turned down, but turned off. Completely. Am I sad this game didn't get released? No. Honestly, I've never been a fan of the games, just the music, and since that's garbage here, I'm not missing anything. And really, neither are you.
Hey, did you know that they were going to release a version of Return Fire on the Saturn? Yeah, that's right, the Saturn. This military-based capture the flag game showed up on the 3DO, PlayStation, and PC, but the Saturn never got any love. I remember being kind of sad back in the day because I felt that this would have been a great title for the system. But they were actually working on it, and an incomplete yet playable version was leaked by a member of the development team. Some people insist that this is complete, but there is no way. I mean, it's just sad if it is. Because really, the game is barely playable at all. It runs at an extremely low frame rate, which is beyond unacceptable. And if you get rid of the HUD and play in full screen, the frame rate can become so low that it's absolutely 100% unplayable. We're talking 2, maybe 3 frames per second if you're lucky. Not only that, but for whatever reason, the music is all in mono. Lastly, they didn't even bother to implement game saves at all, only a password feature. Yeah, complete my ass. You can tell that this would have otherwise been a great game, but perhaps they just couldn't figure out the Saturn well enough to get a good frame rate. I'm not sure why. I mean, Mass Destruction did 60 frames per second on the same system with far more detail. Sadly, this one was canceled by publisher Williams as they didn't feel very confident in the Saturn. That's according to the developer of the game anyway. Also, I've read that this game has issues working with the Hitachi High Saturn for some reason. How about you? Would you choose this over the 3DO or the PlayStation version? I mean, for any reason at all?
This is Mini Racers for the Nintendo 64. It was being developed by Looking Glass Studios before they gave it the axe and buried it. Luckily, it wasn't buried too deep, and a ROM exists for all of us to enjoy and wonder why it wasn't finished. Honestly, the game had to be fairly close to being complete as the ROM feels pretty much done. I really can't find anything wrong with it, except that the total gameplay experience is pretty short. As you can see, it's a top-down racer in the vein of RC Pro-Am. The Nintendo 64 had more racing games than most systems, but I think this one would have been welcomed and found a spot since it's different from the rest. As you play the Grand Prix, you pick your team based on your preferred car stats. I just tried to pick the middle-of-the-road stats since I can't read the moon language. And these cars look like they should be on the moon with how little detail they have. Not like that makes sense or anything, but yeah. Maybe the final version of the game would have actually had more details on the car. Anyway, the racing is simple. The tracks are all designed well, even if some of them are loaded with tight corners. Luckily, your car can whip its back end around for a tighter turn. You also have a turbo boost to help you catch up if you're behind. That's cool, right? Well, not really, since it's pretty much useless here. At first, the controls feel pretty sluggish. You have 2 cars that you race and they both actually control differently from each other. The bigger car is more sluggish and turns harder. Of course, the smaller car is more nimble and will take turns a bit tighter and is overall easier to control. Races consist of 3 or 4 laps and are typically over in about a minute or less. They really don't have long tracks here, folks. This is why I said the gameplay experience is short. I almost beat the game in less than 25 minutes. But hey, you do have a track editor to help you lengthen the experience. Well, it's more of a track generator since you don't actually form your own track. You can choose different options based off a bunch of slide bars and it will generate a track for you. Messing around with it though, I never saw the same track twice. The game is decent fun in single player, but I imagine in multiplayer it would be even more fun. You and up to 3 of your friends, if you have that many, can play all at once in the same room. But hey, look at the graphics! They're unmistakably N64 visuals. Big blocky polygons with very little texture, but it does have some decent colors. I like the ideas for the backgrounds with all the different themes. There's lots of variety, which is always good. I'm glad they didn't tarnish the game by putting weapons in here. It's fun to play just a straight up racing game where your eye-hand coordination and good controls are what's going to get you to the finish line in first place. I'm actually kind of sad that this game didn't find its way to the store shelves. I would have bought it and played the heck out of it. But this would have been released late in the console's life when the PS2 was coming out, so maybe that dissuaded them. If you can, then I would suggest that you download this ROM and give it a shot on your own EverDrive or emulator of choice. Play it with your friends and have a good time.
Good job!
One infamously canceled game is
Propeller Arena Aviation Battle Championship
from Sega for the Dreamcast. This one was finished and due to be released in late 2001. It's an arena-style game where you first choose one of several really cool pilots in their planes. It's pretty basic, just fly around and shoot all the other planes that are flying around. And at the same time, they're all trying to shoot you down as well as each other. There are no mission objectives, you just need to score the most points, and you do that by getting the most kills. It controls pretty well, but the game doesn't let you fly too high, otherwise you'll stall out for a bit. And sometimes it feels like it can take too long to turn around and get someone in your sights. Each arena that you fight in is surrounded by a bunch of blimps or zeppelins indicating the border. And sadly, you can't blow these up or shoot them down. Also, I'm not sure how these things can even float this high. I mean, they're above the clouds and everything. You'll also see colored floating boxes in the air. These will appear, disappear, and then reappear somewhere else as you play. You blast these to reveal power-ups like missiles, life refills, quick turns, and other stuff. Visually, the game looks fantastic for the Dreamcast, very sharp and colorful, just like you'd expect from Sega's AM2. It's capped at 30 frames per second, but it's still cool. Had this game been released, it would have supported 4 players online and even had microphone support. The game supports multiplayer offline as well, with no performance hit other than a split screen. Even in 4-player split screen, it doesn't slow down or drop any frames. The music feels like it's trying to give off a Crazy Taxi in the Skies kind of vibe, but it was all done by Sega themselves and not licensed. It's not necessarily bad, but it definitely is energetic. I just wish they would have spent some of that energy making it a little better. Unfortunately, this game was abruptly canceled because of the September 11th attacks where hijacked planes were flown into buildings. And guess what you can do in this game? Yep, that's right. Hell, even one of the songs sings about a day in September. So the game was pulled and we never got it. How do you feel about that? Do you agree with Sega's decision at the time? Do you think that they could update it graphically and bring it out now on modern platforms, or should this one forever remain tucked away? What would you do if you were Sega?
Well, I guess it's because of the big power. Did you see the awesome power of the USA?
All right, there we are. I'm pretty sure I don't want some of these sitting on my shelves, actually, now that I've come to think about it.
I don't know. Some of them are pretty good.
Some are pretty good, but not all of them.
True, but things get canceled for a reason, and we've got more to show you.
Pinkey is a 2D platformer that was developed by Scott William Games and Data Design. It actually saw a release on the Amiga in 1995. It was going to be ported and released for the Super Nintendo here, but that obviously didn't quite happen. The unfinished ROM is out there for anyone who would like to download it and play it. And when I say unfinished, I mean unfinished. The game is playable to an extent, but obviously there's a lot that's not in here yet. The goal of the game is to travel to distant planets to save dinosaur eggs. The little vehicle that you ride in is supposed to be able to access different parts of the level by its arms and extension poles. I know this because if you watch the demo, you can see all that it's supposed to be able to do. In the playable portion of the game, all you can do is extend the vehicle upwards. You can't use the arms at all, which means your vehicle stays on the bottom of the level. You can, of course, get out of that sweet-ass ride and traverse the levels on your own. You can collect the dinosaur eggs one at a time and bring them back to be stored. Man, they must be delicious eggs, or else what the hell's the point of collecting them? It doesn't matter, this cute alien character is up to no good whatever it is. Anyway, the ROM is fun to just mess around with. It's definitely a developer build since the debugging tools are enabled and you can access any level you want. And once you're in that level, you can move your character anywhere on the screen with a push of the select button, although you can't set him down again to be played. The best part of this prototype is the music. It's actually pretty good in spots. Honestly though, if it were finished and released, I doubt it would have been a huge hit.
Amazingly, the original was being readied for release on the Game Boy Color in 1996 by UK developer HotGen Studios. This is a demake of the PlayStation version and surprisingly is pretty intact. Like the original, you can play as Chris or Jill. As you can see, the game is clearly nowhere near being finished as location code appears on the screen more often than not. It features the same kind of tank controls, pre-rendered backdrops, and constant scene switching as the original. In fact, it's really cool to see how closely they were able to recreate some of the visuals. Even a lot of the dialogue is identical, though not all of it. What's more is that the sprites even scale in and out of the scenes as they move around. Also, there's now music playing all the time. Now, there's only one music track, but it's kinda creepy sounding. Hell, I say it's appropriate for a Game Boy Color game in this genre. There were lots of new plans for this one, including more types of enemies and being able to disarm some of the traps. They were also supposed to revamp the save feature. Sadly, a lot of this didn't even make it into this version, as the only kinds of enemies here are green zombies who get on their knees when they die. I mean, there's no dogs where there should be dogs. I mean, there wasn't yet anyway. Oh yeah, give it to me, you dead green man! Another interesting aspect is that the game doesn't keep track of ammunition at all. So that means each gun you get has unlimited shots, and it's pointless to collect ammo as it just takes up space in your inventory. Some weapons, however, like the bazooka, can't even be equipped. The game ends at the lab elevator and can't be finished. As they were developing this, HotGen sent a build of this game to Capcom for its approval, and apparently they turned it down, not being confident that customers would be happy with it. I don't know about that. It's pretty good for a PlayStation to Game Boy Color port, all things considered. I think that most fans of who owned a Game Boy Color would have really enjoyed this. There are two recovered prototypes of the game which are actually labeled as Cart 1 and Cart 2. Cart 1 is the one that you want to play. Cart 2 is an older build and you can only play as Chris. Also, a lot of rooms and other things can't be accessed yet in this version as it's much more incomplete. It's really interesting seeing what HotGen did with this, and despite the very unfinished feeling to the game, it's still pretty cool. Do you feel that Capcom was wise to pull the plug on this one?
Here's Titan Warriors for the NES by Capcom of America, developed in 1988. It's a top-down vertical shooter that was meant to be the sequel to the arcade game Vulgus. It's unknown exactly why this one was cancelled, but fortunately a ROM was leaked. It's a game that's fun to play but insanely hard. I'm bad at shooters, but some of them I just like to play, and this is becoming one of them. So I wonder why Capcom dropped the ball on this one and decided to cancel it. The game is completely playable, although a few tweaks could be made. The main one is hit detection. For the most part, it works well, but there's many times that I feel I'm shooting enemies, but the weapons go right through them. I would imagine that this kind of thing would have been fixed before the game was released. Speaking of weapons, this game has a really cool idea. You collect an icon that gives your ship side cannons. At first I thought these were pretty cool because you can launch them to the sides of the screen. Then they slowly come back to your ship, hitting anything that's in front of them. That is if you're not dumb enough to stop shooting your weapon, which doesn't have built-in rapid fire, by the way. I played like this for the longest time until I figured out a cool trick. After you launch your side cannons and they start coming back, you can hit the same button again, which will stop them in place. They'll stay at any distance you choose until you decide to recall them to your ship. This is really helpful for fighting enemies and especially bosses. As you can see, it takes your ship out of the way of direct fire. But if you're like me, you're still going to find a way to get hit and die. Yeah, your ship explodes with one hit. Now, I'm not totally against this, but they could have balanced out the bosses a bit more so they aren't so tough. Besides these cannons, you can collect two types of laser weapons for power-ups. One of them shoots diagonally and ricochets, which is super convenient, and the other of course shoots straight forward. There's another icon that you can collect that has the letter B on it. Naturally, this would be a bomb, but nothing happens when I try to use it. So obviously they hadn't finished building this part of the game. It's a shame too, as a bomb would have been super useful against bosses. For a game that's so tough, it sure has some short levels. It's like it's trying to compensate for being so short. Kind of like how guys compensate for their small, pathetic genitals by buying huge trucks or even huge game collections. Just kidding to anybody who has a sizable collection, we're sure you've got it where it counts. But yeah, you'll be fighting a boss within 2 or 3 minutes of starting a stage if you live that long. Graphically, the game looks good. The first level is on Mars, and just look at all of that water. The Uranus stage looks more like Mars than Mars does. The second part of each stage takes place in space and usually looks kind of boring. The music isn't half bad, and it's unmistakably 8-bit Capcom, and that's comforting to me. I can even hear sound effects that they've ripped from other Capcom games like Gun.Smoke. It's mind-boggling to think that Capcom chose to release games like Yo Noid instead of this. Needless to say that this is way more fun to play, and I do mean way more fun. I'm just happy I was able to find the ROM for my EverDrive, and I'm sure you can find it too.
Hellgate from Jester Interactive was due to be released on the Dreamcast in 2001. It was programmed by a developer called Horny Dog. Yeah, I guess this is a combat racing game in hell. Without the racing, Horny Dog actually wanted it to be like a cross between Quake and Wipeout. This game feels like it's the fastest game ever made. I mean, seriously, what the hell? And holy crap is it twitchy. Even adjusting the sensitivity all the way down, it's just insane, and you really need to be careful in order to do anything. And what do you do? Well, basically you ride around, shoot little enemies, restock your weapons, and find new places to go. It seems to be an adventure game of sorts. You have to find certain things and destroy them to open up the exit and stuff like that. Again, controlling the game is nuts. I mean, trying to navigate these high ledges without falling off is extremely tough and nerve-wracking. And trust me, you'll find yourself falling off a hell of a lot. You really need to just barely touch the analog stick and the shoulder buttons to have any semblance of control. I'd like to think that this one was just not finished and optimized, and that's why it plays like trash. It seems to be mostly complete though, even with cutscenes and the like. Apparently the development lasted about 15 months on this one, and the entire team didn't fully believe in the project. Also, Sega announced that they were ceasing production of the Dreamcast, so Horny Dog ceased production on this game. But honestly though, I'm glad it didn't get released, at least not like this. It's still kind of interesting what they were trying to do though. Geist Force from Netter Digital is another cancelled game for the Sega Dreamcast. This one is a shooter that plays a lot like Star Fox 64 in a lot of aspects. Through most of the game, you're flying on rails with a limited amount of movement, and you're always going forward. You have an on-screen cursor to aim your shots, and you can fire some kind of missile as well. You even have a weird thing, and you press all 4 face buttons at the same time to do your weird thing. There's also a dodge move that you can do with the L and R triggers. You sometimes get taken off the rails, and then you're allowed to fly around freely, and this usually happens during boss fights. The control feels very smooth here, and it was never an issue for me. This was one of the first third-party games to be announced in Japan for the Dreamcast before its launch, and it was actually shown at a couple of trade shows. The leaked prototype here is far from being complete. The game often crashes if something happens that it doesn't expect, making the console reboot itself. There's also plenty of graphics, sounds, and music missing, but all in all, I think you can tell what the game is trying to be. Sure, sometimes you can fly into areas that you're not supposed to be in. Or really weird things happen to the environment if you fire your weapon. Speaking of environments, I like that you can shoot some of it down or is otherwise destructible. That's always fun. Supposedly, this one was cancelled because they were missing deadlines and the development team wasn't playing nice with each other. They also weren't very confident that the game would succeed. I gotta say, if you can't be confident in your project, then it's probably best if you cancel it. I feel that this game needs a lot of work, but I think if it could have been finished, it would have been a fun little launch game for the system here in the US as it was planned to be.
All right, there we are, a whole slew of unreleased games. Are you sad that they're not sitting on your shelf?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these games, we're not exactly sure why they were canceled, but, you know, they were. Would you like to see them complete? What are some more games that didn't get released that you feel that we can get a hold of and cover in an upcoming episode? And let us know how, because, you know, a lot of these are hard to come by. There was a lot of games I wanted to cover. They haven't been leaked yet.
Yeah. That's, and if you know a spot that has a ROM that's not all over the internet.
And if you're a developer, please leak your unfinished ROMs.
Yeah, please.
Or whatever, you know, ISOs, whatever. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching GameSack.
Joe, what are you doing?
Well, Dave, we just got done talking about games that didn't get released, so I figured I'd come out here and admire the games that were lucky enough to actually get released.
That's a good idea.
I know!
But I got a question for you. James Buster Douglas Boxing, why was this game released? I mean, it's not Punch-Out.
Oh, come on, Dave, it has its uses.
It does?
Yeah, see?
Oh, wow. Joe, can I borrow this?
You sure can!
You're right, Joe, it does have its uses.